It was one of those cool evenings in early spring when the whole town seemed to come alive. The air was soft, filled with the smell of popcorn and excitement. The annual community talent show was about to begin. People from all around the little town had gathered in the local hall, a cozy building with wooden floors that creaked every time someone walked. Kids ran between the chairs laughing, old folks chatted with warm smiles, and parents tried to calm their nervous children who were ready to perform. The stage was simple, just a few lights, a microphone, and a faded curtain that had seen many years of performances. But that night, it wasn't about fancy setups or big prizes. It was about fun, laughter, and showing what you could do, even if it was just a silly dance or a magic trick that didn't go quite right. The crowd was ready for a night of joy. Backstage, among the nervous singers and dancers, stood a man named Tommy Reynolds. He was in his late 30s, tall but a bit slouched, with calloused hands and oil stains that even soap couldn't completely remove. Everyone in town knew Tommy, the quiet mechanic who fixed cars at the small garage on Maple Street. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he always had a small smile that made people feel at ease. He was friendly, kind, and hardworking, but no one had ever seen him as someone who would step onto a stage. When Tommy's name appeared on the list of performers, most people thought it was a joke. "Tommy, the mechanic?" Someone laughed. "What's he gonna do, change a tire on stage?" Another joked. Even the event host chuckled when calling his name. Nobody expected anything serious. It was a small town. People teased each other in good fun. Tommy heard the laughter, but he didn't seem bothered. He stood quietly, holding his old guitar by the neck, the case worn and scratched from years of use. He looked out from behind the curtain at the crowded hall, took a deep breath, and smiled to himself. It wasn't nerves that filled his chest, it was something else. Something deeper, like a story waiting to be told. The host introduced him with a grin. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, our next performer, Tommy Reynolds. Let's see what our favorite mechanic has up his sleeve tonight." The audience laughed and clapped politely, still thinking it would be a funny act. Maybe he'd sing a goofy song or do something to make them laugh. Tommy walked up the few wooden steps to the stage. His boots made a soft thud on the floor. He looked a little awkward as he adjusted the microphone. The light from above shone on his face, showing lines of hard work and years of quiet living. He cleared his throat, looked at the crowd, and said softly, "Good evening." His voice was calm but unsure. Someone from the back called out, "Play us a country tune, Tommy." And a few people chuckled. He smiled politely, nodded, and then sat down on the simple wooden stool in the middle of the stage. The room was still buzzing with small laughter and chatter. Tommy gently placed the guitar on his knee, ran his fingers across the strings, and adjusted the tuning pegs. The sound of the strings being tuned echoed softly. The crowd was only half paying attention, thinking it was all part of the act. Then Tommy lowered his head for a second, as if saying a small prayer, and placed his fingers on the strings. When he played the first note, everything changed. It was soft, but it carried through the room like a wave. The sound was clean, rich, and full of emotion. The laughter stopped. The small conversations faded. Even the children went silent. Every ear turned toward that simple, beautiful sound. Tommy's fingers began to move, slowly at first, then faster, flowing with ease and grace. The notes blended into a melody that sounded like a memory, sweet, sad, and full of life. No one had ever heard him play before, and it was hard to believe that this quiet mechanic, the man who fixed flat tires and broken engines, could make music that touched the heart so deeply. He played with his eyes half closed, lost in the music. His fingers seemed to know exactly where to go, dancing across the strings like they were alive. The melody told a story of struggle, of dreams that had been left behind, and of hope that never really died. Every note seemed to carry a piece of his life. His long days at the workshop, the loneliness of nights spent in silence, the memories of a past he had never spoken about. The hall was completely silent. Even the host, who had been joking just minutes earlier, stood frozen near the curtain. It was as if the whole world had paused to listen. After a few minutes, Tommy's voice joined the music. It wasn't loud or fancy. It was real. Deep, a little rough around the edges, but honest. He sang about small-town dreams, about working hard and waiting for a break that never came. His words were simple, but they went straight to the heart. You could feel that he wasn't performing. He was sharing a piece of himself. People looked at each other in disbelief. Some blinked back tears. The same audience that had laughed at him just moments ago now sat motionless, afraid to break the spell. Even the old man who ran the sound system forgot to breathe for a second. When Tommy finished the song, he let the last note fade into the air. For a long moment, nobody moved. The silence hung heavy in the room. Then one person began to clap, softly at first. Then another. Within seconds, the hall erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering, whistling, clapping so hard their hands hurt. Some shouted his name, others just smiled with tears in their eyes. Tommy looked up, surprised and a little shy. He gave a small nod, smiled, and said softly into the microphone, "Thank you." Then he stood, lifted the old guitar, and walked off the stage quietly, leaving behind a room full of people who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Backstage, a few of the performers stared at him wide-eyed. One young boy who had been too nervous to sing earlier ran up to him and said, "Mister, that was amazing." Tommy chuckled and patted the boy's shoulder. "Just keep practicing, kid. That's all there is to it." Outside the hall, as people left, all they could talk about was the mechanic with the guitar. "Who knew he could play like that?" someone said. "I thought he was just joking," another replied. The video of his performance, recorded by a student on a shaky phone, was already being shared around town. By the next morning it would be everywhere, but Tommy didn't know that yet. That night he simply went home. The stars were bright and the air was still. He placed his guitar back in its old case, set it near the small window, and sat down with a cup of tea. The applause still echoed faintly in his mind, but he didn't think about fame or attention. He thought about his mother, the woman who had given him that guitar so many years ago. He remembered her gentle words, "When you play, let people feel what's inside your heart, not what's on your mind." He smiled softly. For the first time in years, he felt like he had done exactly that. The man everyone thought was just the quiet mechanic had reminded his little town of something simple but powerful. That sometimes, greatness doesn't come with loud announcements or bright lights. Sometimes it walks onto a stage quietly, sits down with an old guitar, and lets the first note do all the talking. The next morning, the town was buzzing with talk about what had happened the night before. It seemed like everyone had seen or heard about the mechanic who had turned the talent show into something unforgettable. The small cafe on the corner, the one where people gathered for coffee every morning, was full of whispers and excitement. "Did you see him play?" one man asked, stirring his coffee. "My daughter filmed the whole thing," a woman said proudly. "It gave me chills." "I thought it was a joke," someone added, shaking his head. Then he played that first note and, wow. Tommy had no idea his performance was being talked about so much. He woke up early, just like every other day, and headed to the garage. The same smell of oil, metal, and gasoline filled the air. He opened the rolling door, switched on the lights, and started wiping his tools. To him, it was just another morning. He didn't even check his phone until a few hours later, when his friend and coworker, Joe, came rushing into the shop out of breath and grinning from ear to ear. "Tommy, you're famous, man," Joe said, waving his phone. Tommy frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Joe shoved the phone in his hands. On the screen was the video from last night, the one someone had recorded at the show. It already had thousands of views. Comments were flooding in. "This is pure soul. I can't believe this guy's a mechanic. That song made me cry." Tommy watched the video quietly. He didn't say much. He just gave a small, almost shy smile and handed the phone back. "Guess people liked it," he said softly, going back to tightening a bolt on a car. Joe laughed. "Liked it?" "They loved it. You've got to see what people are saying. They want more." But Tommy shook his head. "I wasn't trying to be anyone special. Just played what I felt." Still, word spread fast. That evening, the local radio station called, asking if he would come for an interview. A small newspaper wanted to write about him too. At first, Tommy said no. He didn't like attention. He was just a man who fixed cars and played his guitar at home when the day was done. Fame wasn't something he ever chased, but people kept encouraging him. His friends, customers, even strangers. Everywhere he went, someone would stop him. "Hey, you're the guy from the talent show, right? That song of yours, beautiful, man. Really beautiful." He would nod politely, thank them, and continue with his day. But deep inside, something had started to change. The music he had buried for so long was waking up again. That night after dinner, Tommy sat in his small living room with his guitar. The TV played softly in the background, but he wasn't watching. His hands rested on the strings. He thought about how it felt on that stage, the quiet before the first note, the way the crowd had gone still, the warmth of the lights. For years he had played alone, only for himself, but sharing it with others, that had felt different. It had felt right. He started to play again, softly at first. The sound filled the small room, warm and tender. The tune he played wasn't planned. It came from memory, from feelings that had no words. As he played, he thought about his younger days before life had gotten so serious. Back then he was full of dreams. He had played in small cafes and open mic nights hoping someone would notice him. But when his mother fell sick, he had to give up those nights to work full-time. After she passed, he couldn't bring himself to play anymore. Every time he looked at his guitar, he saw her face, smiling, encouraging. It hurt too much, so he packed the guitar away and focused on the garage. But now all those old feelings were coming back. He could almost hear her voice in his mind. "Don't let the music die inside you, son. You were born to play." He played until midnight, lost in memories and melodies. When he finally stopped, he sat in silence for a long time. The old clock ticked on the wall, the only sound in the room. He realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The next few days were strange for Tommy. His video was now being shared far beyond his small town. People from other cities and even other countries were leaving comments, saying how much they loved his performance. Some said his song reminded them of their own lives, of dreams they had forgotten. Others said it gave them hope. Tommy didn't know what to do with all that attention. He still worked every day at the garage, still fixed engines and changed tires. But now people came by just to see him. A woman once showed up holding her little boy's hand. "My son wanted to meet you," she said. "He watched your video and started learning guitar." Tommy smiled kindly, knelt down to the boy's height and said, "Keep playing, kid. Don't stop no matter what." More invitations came in. Churches, local events, even a nearby college wanted him to perform. He turned down most of them at first. He didn't see himself as a performer. But deep inside, he was starting to miss the stage, the feeling of connection that came when his music reached people's hearts. One Friday evening, he finally agreed to play again. It was a small event at the town park. Nothing fancy, just a few chairs, a microphone, and the cool breeze of early summer. People brought their families, blankets, and snacks. When Tommy walked onto the small stage, the crowd cheered warmly. There was no laughter this time, only excitement. He looked around, took a deep breath, and began to play. This time he wasn't nervous. The music flowed easily, like water finding its way home. Every note seemed to tell a story, his story. The crowd listened in silence, just as they had before, but now there was something more. They weren't just hearing the music. They were feeling it. Halfway through his song, he noticed something that made his heart swell. The same little boy from before was sitting in the front row, holding a small guitar and trying to follow along. Tommy smiled as he played, and the boy smiled back. That moment said more than words ever could. When the concert ended, people stood and clapped again, calling his name. Someone shouted, "Play another one," so he did. He played one more song, slower this time, softer, filled with gratitude. As he left the stage that night, he didn't feel like the same man who once hid behind his work and routine. Something inside him had changed. He realized that music wasn't just a dream from his past. It was a part of who he was. It didn't matter if he played for 10 people or 10,000. What mattered was that he played with heart. Later that night, as he walked home carrying his guitar, the streetlights cast a golden glow on the quiet road. The stars were bright and the air smelled of fresh grass. He felt peaceful, more alive than he had in years. He stopped for a moment, looked up at the sky and said softly, "Thank you, Mom." He didn't know what would come next, maybe more shows, maybe a chance to record his songs, but none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that he had finally found the courage to share his gift again. And as he reached his front porch, he realized something beautiful. The world might have laughed at him before that first note, but now they were listening, and they weren't going to stop anytime soon. The days passed, and the video of Tommy's performance continued to spread far beyond the town. It was now being shared by strangers from different cities, even different countries. People wrote messages saying how much his music touched their hearts. Some said it reminded them of the dreams they had given up. Others said it gave them courage to start again. Tommy didn't really understand how big it was getting. He wasn't on social media much, and he didn't care about numbers or followers. He only knew one thing. People were feeling something through his music, and that meant more to him than anything else. Still, the sudden attention felt strange. Some days he enjoyed it. Other days, it made him uncomfortable. At the garage, he tried to keep life normal. He fixed cars, changed oil, greeted customers just like always. But now people came not only for repairs, they came to see him. "Hey, you're that musician from the internet, right?" a man said one morning, holding out his phone with Tommy's video playing. Tommy smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, that's me. You've got talent, my friend," the man said warmly. "You made my wife cry with that song." In a good way, of course, Tommy laughed quietly. "Glad to hear that." After the man left, Tommy stood for a moment, wiping his hands with a rag. He still couldn't believe how a simple night at the talent show had changed so much. All his life, he'd stayed in the background, just another face in the crowd fixing things for others. And now people were looking at him differently. Not because he was special, but because he had shared something real. That evening, as the sun began to set, he sat outside his small house on the porch with his guitar resting across his lap. The warm orange glow covered everything, and the air smelled of cut grass. He started to play softly just for himself, the way he used to before all of this began. Music had always been his safe place. When words failed, the guitar spoke for him. Every note carried feelings he couldn't explain. Sadness, hope, loneliness, peace, all mixed together like colors in a sunset. While he played, an old memory came to him, clear as day. He was 19 again, standing in a small cafe on the edge of town. The place was half empty, the lights dim, but he remembered the feeling of excitement in his chest. It was one of his first real performances back then. His mother had been in the audience, sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. After that night, she had hugged him and said, "I told you people need to hear your music. It's got truth in it." That was before life had changed, before she fell sick, before the hospital bills and the endless work hours that left him too tired to dream. He stopped playing for a moment and looked up at the sky, whispering softly, "Guess you were right. Mom, they finally heard it." The next week, Tommy received a letter in the mail. It wasn't from anyone he knew. The envelope had a logo from a small recording studio in the nearby city. Inside was a short note. "We saw your performance online. Your music has heart. Something rare these days. If you're willing, we'd love to meet and discuss recording a few songs." Tommy stared at the letter for a long time. His hands trembled slightly. He'd never imagined something like this could happen to him. Not now, not after so many years. The idea of recording songs felt like a dream he had let go of long ago. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the letter. Part of him wanted to go for it to see where it could lead, but another part was scared of disappointment, of stepping into a world he no longer understood. Early the next morning, he made up his mind. He didn't have much to lose, so he called the number on the letter. A cheerful voice answered, and they arranged a meeting for the weekend. On Saturday, Tommy drove to the city. It had been years since he'd gone beyond the town limits. The tall buildings, the busy streets, the noise, it all felt overwhelming. He parked his old pickup near the studio and sat for a few minutes, taking deep breaths before walking in. Inside, everything smelled of wood and coffee. The walls were lined with guitars, keyboards, and microphones. Behind a glass window, a man with kind eyes waved him in. "You must be Tommy. It's great to finally meet you." They talked for hours. The man told him how his video had moved people. "It wasn't just your voice," he said. "It was the honesty. You don't sing to impress. You sing to tell a story. That's what makes it special." Tommy didn't know what to say. He just smiled and said quietly, "I've never tried to be anything else." They offered to record a few of his songs, nothing big, just something simple to start with. Tommy agreed. The next week he returned with his guitar, the same one he'd had since he was young. The moment he sat down in front of the microphone, he felt that same mix of nerves and peace he'd felt at the talent show. When he began to play, everyone in the room went silent. His fingers moved gently, his voice soft but strong. The song he chose wasn't new. It was one he'd written years ago during the hardest time of his life. It was about holding on, about not giving up even when everything feels lost. When he finished, the sound engineer looked at him and said, That was something else." Tommy didn't know what would happen next. Maybe the songs would stay in the studio forever. Maybe people would hear them. But it didn't matter. For the first time in years, he felt alive again, like he was finally doing what he was meant to do. As he left the studio that day, he stopped for a moment at the door and looked back at the empty room. The lights were dim, the smell of coffee still in the air. He smiled, knowing that no matter where life took him, he had given his music another chance to breathe. Back in town, people welcomed him home with cheers and curiosity. They had heard he was recording, and the excitement grew even more. The same kids who used to laugh at him in the beginning now looked up to him. Some even started learning instruments, hoping to play like him one day. One afternoon, while walking home from the garage, Tommy saw a group of teenagers practicing in a park. They had an old speaker, a few guitars, and a small crowd watching. When they saw him, they waved him over. "Hey, can you listen to our song?" one of them asked nervously. Tommy smiled and nodded. He listened carefully as they played, nodding to the rhythm, tapping his foot. When they finished, he clapped and said, "You've got something there. Keep working on it. Don't stop," the boys grinned proudly. "Thanks. We saw your video. You made us believe we can do it too." Those words stayed with Tommy long after he went home. He realized that what had happened wasn't just about music or fame. It was about connection, about showing people that it's never too late to follow what you love. No matter how small the start that night, sitting on his porch under the stars, he felt something new inside him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't excitement. It was peace. He knew now that every wrong turn, every quiet year had led him back to this. Life had its own rhythm, just like music. Sometimes you miss a beat, sometimes you slow down. But as long as you keep playing, the song never really ends. Tommy looked up at the night sky, the same sky his mother used to watch with him. He whispered softly, "Guess I'm finally playing the right tune." And somewhere in the quiet of that small town, it felt like the world was listening. The sound of Tommy's song slowly began to travel farther than he could ever imagine. The small recording session that had started as a quiet experiment turned into something much bigger. The studio released one of his songs online, the same one he had played at the town talent show, and it caught fire overnight. People who had never heard his name before were now talking about the mechanic with the guitar, the man who sang from the heart. Comments poured in from all over the world. Some said his music helped them through lonely nights. Others said it reminded them of family, of home, of a simpler time when life felt more real. At first, Tommy didn't understand the scale of it. He still lived the same way. He woke up early, went to the garage, fixed cars, and came home to his small house at sunset. But little by little, things around him started to change. One morning when he arrived at work, a group of young people was waiting outside the garage. They had cameras and small notebooks in hand. "Are you Tommy?" one of them asked excitedly. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. "We're from a local news channel," the young woman said. "We'd love to do a short interview about your story. How a small-town mechanic became an online sensation." Tommy looked around at the half-fixed cars and greasy tools. "Here?" he asked, half smiling. "Here is perfect," she said. "This is where it all began, right?" The interview was simple. They asked about his childhood, his love for music, and how it felt to suddenly become known. Tommy answered with honesty, not trying to sound special. "I just played from the heart," he said. "I never expected anything. I'm just thankful people listened." When the interview aired, it reached even more people. Bigger channels picked up the story. Soon, Tommy was being invited to perform on television, on radio shows, and at small concerts in nearby cities. At first, he hesitated. The idea of bright lights and big crowds made him nervous. But his friends convinced him. "People aren't coming to see a superstar," Joe said one day at the garage. "They're coming to see you." The same guy they saw at the talent show. "Just be yourself." So he agreed. His first big show was held in a nearby city auditorium. When he arrived, the place was already full. Hundreds of people sat waiting, some holding signs with his name, others holding guitars hoping to get an autograph. Backstage, Tommy sat quietly on a wooden chair, his guitar beside him. He could hear the soft murmur of the crowd, the laughter, the excitement. His heart pounded fast, not from fear but from disbelief. He thought about the nights he had played alone in his small living room, never imagining a crowd like this. When his name was announced, the audience erupted in cheers. He walked out slowly, the lights bright on his face. For a second, he just stood there looking at the sea of faces. Then he smiled, that same shy, honest smile that had won people over. He sat on the stool, adjusted the microphone and said, "I don't have a fancy show for you. Just me and this old guitar." The crowd laughed softly, then fell silent as he began to play. The first note carried through the hall, gentle but powerful. The sound was pure, untouched by tricks or effects. His fingers moved smoothly, his voice calm and full of emotion. Every song he sang told a story, not of struggle, of love, of never giving up. People listened quietly, some with eyes closed, some with tears in their eyes. In that room, it didn't matter who they were or where they came from. For those few minutes, they were all connected through the same feeling. When the show ended, the applause was deafening. Tommy stood, slightly overwhelmed, and gave a small bow. "Thank you," he said simply. He didn't say much more. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him. After the concert, he was invited to bigger stages. One of the country's famous morning shows asked him to perform live. That was when things really took off. Millions watched as the humble mechanic played his guitar and shared his story on national television. Even after that, Tommy never acted like a celebrity. He went home to his quiet life, still fixing cars when he could, still helping neighbors when their engines failed. Fame hadn't changed who he was, it had just given his heart a louder voice. People admired him for that. In a world full of glitter and noise, Tommy's simplicity felt refreshing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just sharing something real. But behind the success, there were quiet moments too. Nights when he sat by his window, guitar in hand, wondering how it all happened so fast. Sometimes he felt a little lost. He didn't know where this path would take him next. Music had always been personal. Now it was public. And while that was beautiful, it was also a little scary. One night he received a letter that touched him deeply. It was from a young woman who had lost her father. She wrote that she had watched his first video every night before bed, because his song reminded her of her dad's strength and kindness. "Your music helped me through my pain," she wrote. "Thank you for reminding me that there's still light in the world." Tommy read the letter 3 times, each time more moved than before. He placed it in his old guitar case next to a faded picture of his mother. That letter reminded him why he played, not for fame. Not for attention, but to reach people's hearts. From then on, every time he performed, he played like he was talking to that young woman, to every person who ever felt lost or forgotten. His shows became known not for big lights or loud effects, but for their honesty. People said it felt like listening to a friend share his story beside a warm fire. One evening after a small concert, a reporter asked him, "You've touched millions of people. How do you stay so humble?" Tommy smiled softly and said, "Because I remember what it's like to be nobody. I remember standing in front of a crowd that laughed before I even played a note. I remember working with greasy hands and wondering if life would ever change. I'm still that same man. The music just helped people see me differently." The video of that answer went viral too. People admired his humility even more. He wasn't just a musician anymore. He was an inspiration. Soon, schools started inviting him to talk to students. He would tell them, "Don't be afraid to share your gift, no matter how small you think it is. Someone out there needs to hear it." He met people from all walks of life, dreamers, workers, parents, children, and each time he listened more than he spoke. That was his gift too, listening. He made people feel seen, just as his music had made them feel understood. But the moment that touched him most happened at a small cafe months later. He was having tea after a show when an old man approached him. "You probably don't remember me," the man said with a smile. "I was at that first talent show. I laughed when you went on stage." Tommy looked at him kindly, not upset, just curious. The man continued, "But when you started playing, I realized how wrong I was. That night changed how I see people. It taught me never to judge someone by what they look like or what they do for a living. Thank you for that." Tommy smiled, shook his hand, and said softly, "Thank you for listening." That evening, as he drove home, the lights of the city twinkled behind him. He rolled down the window, letting the cool air touch his face. Life had taken him places he'd never dreamed of. But he still felt most at peace in the quiet moments. The road, the stars, the hum of the wind, and the steady heartbeat of his old truck engine. When he reached home, He put his guitar beside the window, just like always. He sat there for a while watching the night sky. He thought about how everything had started, with a small stage, a few laughs, and a single note that changed everything. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. The world might forget many things, but it would never forget the night a humble mechanic taught everyone that music doesn't come from fame or wealth. It comes from the heart. And that was a truth he would keep playing for as long as his hands could hold the strings. Years had passed since the night Tommy played that first note, the note that changed everything. The small-town mechanic who once stood shyly before a laughing crowd had now become a name that carried meaning far beyond music. But if you asked Tommy about fame, he would only smile and say, "It's not about being famous. It's about being remembered for something honest." His music had reached millions by then. People still shared clips of his earliest performances, the ones where his hands trembled a little, his voice cracked slightly, and his smile showed pure gratitude. But there was something about those moments that people loved more than any polished stage performance. They felt real. Tommy continued to perform, but never in places that felt too grand. He preferred small halls, open parks, and sometimes just local cafes. He believed music sounded best where people could feel close, where the sound of a guitar could blend with the quiet of the room. He wanted his audience to feel the same warmth he once felt playing in his small living room. But time has a way of slowing even the strongest hands. As the years went by, his fingers didn't move as quickly across the strings as they used to. The long nights of playing and traveling began to take their toll. Sometimes he would pause mid-song, stretch his hands and laugh softly. "Getting old, I guess," he would joke, and the audience would laugh with him. Yet even when his body grew tired, his spirit never did. He still played with the same heart, the same honesty, the same love. People didn't come for the perfection. They came for the feeling. One evening, after a small concert in a quiet town, a young boy came up to him backstage. The boy looked about 12, holding a small, worn-out guitar. His hands shook as he spoke. "Sir," he said softly, "I started playing because of you. I watched your old videos online. My friends laughed at me when I said I wanted to play guitar too. But I kept trying, and now I can play one of your songs." Tommy's eyes softened. "Can you?" he asked kindly. "Play it for me." The boy nodded, took a deep breath, and started strumming. The melody wasn't perfect, a few notes missed, a few strings buzzed, but the feeling was there. It was raw, pure, and real. When he finished, Tommy clapped softly. "That," he said, "was beautiful. Don't ever stop. People might laugh now, but one day they'll listen." The boy smiled wide, his eyes full of hope. That small exchange reminded Tommy of himself years ago, standing on that same kind of stage, hearing laughter before applause. It made him realize how far one person's courage can reach, how one small act can inspire another to keep going. In the following months, Tommy started a small program in his town to help young musicians. He called it The First Note. It wasn't about competition or talent. It was about giving people a chance to be heard, no matter who they were or what they did for a living. He spent hours teaching children how to hold a guitar, how to listen to rhythm, how to find their own sound. He didn't teach them to chase fame. He taught them to play from the heart. Music, he would say, isn't about showing off. It's about sharing something true. His simple words left deep marks on everyone who came. Soon, The First Note grew into something beautiful, a small community of dreamers, workers and students who came together through the language of music. One afternoon, while sitting in the old garage where everything began, Tommy looked around the quiet space. The smell of oil and metal was still there, the same as before. His old tools lay on the shelves, dusty but untouched. He picked up a wrench, smiled, and said softly to himself, "I never thought this place would lead me to all that." It had been years since he'd worked there full-time, but he still visited whenever he could. The garage was part of his story, went the beginning. It reminded him that no matter how far he had come, his roots were here. Later that same evening, he was invited to a radio show that wanted to honor his journey. During the interview, the host asked him, "If you could go back to that night, the night when everyone thought it was a joke, would you change anything?" Tommy thought for a moment, then shook his head gently. "No," he said. "If they hadn't laughed, maybe I wouldn't have played the way I did. Maybe I wouldn't have learned how strong music can be. Sometimes what looks like a bad moment is really the start of something good." His answer left the studio silent for a few seconds. Then the host smiled and said, "You've taught people more than just music. You've taught them hope." Tommy laughed lightly. "Hope and a few guitar chords," he said, and the room filled with soft laughter again. But deep down he knew that was true. His journey wasn't just about music. It was about proving that anyone, no matter how ordinary their life seems, can touch hearts if they dare to share what they love. Over time, Tommy performed less and less, choosing to spend more days at home or teaching his students. One quiet afternoon, he sat by the same window he always had, his guitar resting on his lap. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and orange, and the soft wind carried the sound of distant laughter from children playing outside. He played a few gentle notes, letting them drift through the open window. It was a song he had written recently, not for the world, not for any album, but for himself. A song of gratitude. It told the story of a man who was laughed at but kept playing. A man who didn't give up, who believed in something invisible, the power of one honest moment. As he finished the song, a knock came at the door. It was one of his old students, now a grown man, holding a camera and a small gift box. "Sir," the young man said, smiling, "I wanted to thank you. You taught me to play, and now I'm teaching others too. I made something for you." Inside the box was a small metal plaque that read, "The first note, because one sound can change everything." Tommy's eyes glistened. He touched the plaque gently, his heart full. "Thank you," he said quietly. That night he placed it beside his old guitar case, the same one that held the letter from the girl who had written to him years ago. His story, he realized, wasn't just his anymore. It had become part of many others, a chain of kindness, courage, and hope passed from one heart to another. As the days went on, news of his story continued to spread. People still watched that old video, the one where he played after everyone laughed. New comments kept appearing even years later. "This still gives me chills. He reminds me to never give up." He didn't just play music. He played life. Tommy didn't reply to those comments, and he didn't need to. He was content knowing that his message was still alive. One evening, as he sat under the stars, guitar in hand, a thought crossed his mind. He smiled and said softly, "It all started because they thought it was a joke." He chuckled, shaking his head. Funny how life works. He began to play again, his fingers gentle but sure. The notes floated into the night, soft and steady, like the heartbeat of a story that would never end. In that moment, everything came full circle. The laughter, the fear, the music, the crowds, the letters, the students, the hope. It had all been worth it. Tommy didn't need fame anymore. He didn't need stages or lights. All he needed was what he had always had: a guitar, a quiet evening, and the sound of something honest coming to life through his hands. And somewhere, far away, maybe another young boy or girl heard his music and decided to pick up an instrument. Maybe someone listened to one of his songs and found the courage to keep going. That was his real legacy, not the fame, not the money, but the spark he left behind in others, because in the end, Tommy's story wasn't just about music. It was about faith. Faith in yourself even when others don't see what you see. It was about patience, humility, and the belief that one small sound, one simple act of truth, can echo for years and reach hearts you may never meet. And as long as someone, somewhere, remembers that, his first note will never stop playing.